Italy may be undertaking a programme of deep economic reform, but the recession is getting worse and the country will have to cut its GDP forecast. Joining me here is the country's Finance Minister, Vittorio Grilli. Mr Grilli, thank you for talking to Reuters. Now, the OECD said last week that the Italian economy will shrink by 2.4% this year. Is that a realistic target?
More than a target is a forecast, and we are right now revising our own forecast. By the 20th of September we'll release our own forecast. So I don't know. It's clear that compared to our initial estimates, there has been a worsening. So let's say that we always are quite consistent with the market views. Of course, the market views are not always 1 point. So, but it's fair to say that the cyclical condition in Italy and around the world, and that's part of also of a worsening, is of a weakening cycle. And so.
But that's a realistic ballpark number. It's a roundabout.
Well, I cannot be so specific, but because I will have to wait for the results coming from my offices. So, but I have seen estimate between -2 and now -2.4. So I wouldn't say if -2.4 is a realistic number, but I would say that compared to our original one, which was -1.2, there's been a worsening. So
the government is on a reform path, but Mr Mario Monti may only be there for another 6-7 months. There's real concern about what happens after April. Are investors right to be concerned?
Well, I think that probably investors should keep in mind that the degree of flexibility in choosing economic policy within the European Union and especially the euro area is not unlimited. You know, we have a very strict common economic platform, and especially now that during the crisis we reinforce very much our monetary mechanism now through the fiscal compact, the six-pack, the two-pack, the European semester. There is all set of predefined commitment and economic policy that determine a large part of the economic agenda, especially for countries which are in need to keep the pace of economic reform. So my own opinion, and I think it's more than an opinion because it's the setup of the euro area now, is that whatever government will come in Italy or in any other country in Europe, a large part of the economic agenda is an European economic agenda, and so is already predetermined.
But there's a lot of opposition to that agenda within Italy, from all swathes of society and the political spectrum. Can you guarantee that that reform programme will be continued by whoever comes in April?
I personally believe it, but I disagree with your analysis. I don't think that there is major disagreement on the need of those reforms. And in fact, if you look at the majority with which our reform law had been approved in Parliament, there always been huge number, 80% about. So I think one thing is agreeing, and I think my own opinion is that the large majority of Italian population agree on the need of this reform. The other thing is that this reform hurts. It's not a free lunch. You know, when you go and reform it, is heavy. And so you are not happy, but not being happy and not recognizing that it's necessary is a different thing.
That brings me on to implementation risk. Of course, it's much easier to talk about reform and to even pass the laws than to actually implement them. As you admit, these reforms can be very painful. Why should the investors have any more confidence now about implementation than at any point in the last 2 or 3 years?
Well, again, I disagree that Italy per se has a worse record in implementation than many other countries. What we have been doing right now in our major reform actions is that a lot of the reforms don't need much of additional actions. A lot of the huge reform, like take pension reform, our own fiscal reform, the introduction of property taxes, those are self-enforcing. So One is a change in strategy to do much more self-enforcing law, and the other also we are working very hard in changing the way in which this residual regulation are implemented. So I think that will do still much more work in creating a new system of implementation mechanism that makes things much more automatic.
Okay, just to finish up, there's been a lot of talk at this forum about Monti bis, Mr. Mario Monti extending his term as Prime Minister after April. Is that something that you would welcome? Indeed, do you think that's something Italy needs?
Well, I think that I heard, I read, and I think the first comment and the obvious comment is the great respect that my Prime Minister has and the great confidence that they have in his action. Now, I think as any other country, there's a regular election cycle, so the election will take place next spring, and I think that's the right way of proceeding.
Mr. Grilli, thank you for talking to Reuters. That was Italy's Finance Minister Vittorio Grilli talking to Reuters at the Ambrosetti Forum in Cernobbio, Italy. I'm Jamie McGeever. This is Reuters.